I enjoy fossil hunting, and so when I was given this lesson, I was excited when I looked in here and found that the material talked a little bit about fossils. And so I want to talk a little bit about fossils later on, and we'll show you these that I have collected, and some that I have actually found myself out, and others I have bought. So I'll show you those in a little while. The topic for tonight, we're going to be looking at the age of the earth. Now, I believe that this is a very important topic today, because it doesn't matter if you turn on the most conservative news station to the most liberal news station or anyone in between, or different programs from one side or the other, they'll always say millions and millions of years. And it doesn't matter who it is that, you know, your favorite newscast person that you might listen to or watch every night. If you listen close enough, eventually they're going to say, 65 million years, 100 million years, and things like that. Well, we need to investigate that. And it all goes back, because we're going to be talking to people out there in the community that they don't believe in God, and they're called atheists, or the next level is they don't believe there's enough evidence to prove God, and so they're kind of in between, and those are agnostic. And one of the things that they kind of have in common, agnostic and atheist, is that they don't believe that God created the earth and the universe and everything that we see and know. We got to understand that, yes, there is either a God or there is not a God. There's not a middle ground on this subject. Either God created all things or God did not create all things. There's no middle ground. And we start in Genesis 1:1 with everyone. Because if you study the Bible with someone, you've got to first ask, do you believe in God? Because if they don't believe in God, you can't go any further. You can't go past, in the beginning, God. And that's where you got to start. And, of course, dealing with the age of the earth, we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 1, kind of highlighting some words that are in the first chapter there of Genesis. But I tell you what, it's fascinating to sit down and talk to someone. I remember my son and I were on a plane coming from Cleveland down back home to Jacksonville. As was stated, yes, I have lived in Ohio the last 26 or 27 years because I'm married in Ohio. Married a Columbus girl. Columbus, Ohio. She was born and raised in Columbus. She went to Ohio State and graduated from Ohio State. Yes, we have an Ohio State Buckeye room in our house with all Ohio State stuff. In fact, everything is either scarlet or gray, pretty much. You don't find what they call maize or blue in our house, which are Michigan colors. In fact, I'm surprised I actually said that, because that's actually a cuss word in my house. In my house, we're supposed to say that team up north. And she trained our children. And in fact, I remember when my son was looking at colleges, he says, what if he gets a full scholarship to go to Michigan and doesn't get any more scholarships? She says, I'll pay whatever it takes for him not to go. And I could not get her to go past that Ohio River until finally about 4 years ago. And we are excited and grateful to be down here. We love it down here. We love the people. And we're excited about, the future. And I know that maybe that surprises, because a lot of people out there, they're not excited about what's going to happen. But it all comes back to God. And that God created all things. But as I was saying about that flight from Cleveland back, my son was in the window seat and I was in the outside seat, and we were flying Southwest, and he's as big or a little bit bigger than I am. And if you know Southwest, you get on the plane and you pick your own seats. And we get on there early so that he can sit on one seat and I can sit on the outside seat, and we stretch out as much as we can. and everybody walks by. And unfortunately, this flight was 100% full, so somebody had to sit between us, and it was this guy. And he started talking to my son, and I heard the word or the phrase, "I'm an atheist." And I thought, okay, let's see what my son and I'm listening intently, and my son's going through all the different things. He had just graduated college. He graduated a year ago from a state school in Ohio. And he was explaining a lot of different things to this guy, and this guy couldn't answer anything. And this guy was a physicist. I think that's how you say it. And by the time we got done, the guy said, I started as an atheist. I'm kind of agnostic now because I can't prove by what you've said that there is no God. Well, that was great. I gave him a paper, and we wrote Apologetics Press that said, go on there, search anything. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of articles, and look through it. And I'm excited that y'all are using the Apologetics Press for your vacation Bible school, because those young people need to get that. They're not going to get this in school, in the public school, the age of the earth. What they're going to get is billions of years old. In fact, some have actually stated it's up now to 13.8 billion. When I was a kid, I remember in 7th grade taking an earth science class, and in that earth science class in 7th grade, I remember them saying 5 to 7 billion years old. It's funny how that just in that amount of time, and I have not gotten that many years for it to now all of a sudden be 13.8 billion. Now, when my kids were younger, they might have thought I was billions of years old. But I'm only 52, so I have yet to begun to fight, in this life. Well, the question that we've got to ask is, does the Bible allow for an old universe? Because what else is there for Christians other than the Bible as our guide? We don't look anywhere else. As Christians, we have already decided, or should have already decided, that this is God's Word. And that all Scripture is given by inspiration of God. The word inspiration means that God breathed out the words. And that we have all Scripture. And we know that, you might look at that passage and think, well, he's talking about the Old Testament. But Peter called Paul's word Scripture. So I think it would include everything that was inspired by God. We have the inspired Word of God, complete. So when we go to the book of Genesis, and we dig into Genesis 1, we look at some words, and we'll be looking at some words that can help us. But first of all, based on the biblical genealogies of Genesis 5, 10, and 11, which indicate that there were roughly 2,000 to 4,000 years between Abraham and creation, history coupled with Scripture, which inform us that Abraham lived roughly 2,000 years before Christ, and history informs us that Christ lived roughly 2,000 years ago, what do we conclude? Well, we conclude that that the earth and the universe are and must be fewer than 10,000 years old. Can't be any more than that. And most look at and kind of pinpoint and maybe say 6,000 years. I've heard some other estimates up to 7,500 years. And that fits all within the realm of Scripture. But millions and billions of years do not fit in Scripture. When we look at Moses and him being inspired of God, he states in Genesis that humans were created 6 days after the origin of the earth and universe. Everything, in fact, was created in 6 days, according to Moses. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 11. And it's fascinating because you look into the Old Testament in the beginning and you see Genesis 1:1, Moses inspired to write that. Then you go over to Exodus and God inspired Moses to write that. But then you look over into the book of Romans. Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18, it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." God created everything. In fact, everything that you're sitting on, you're wearing, your eyeglasses, your phone, your rings, your jewelry, whatever, came from God's creation. Nothing that we have, nothing that we own is outside of God's creation, because it took God's creation to create. And there might be more about that. I don't want to go too far into that because there's probably a whole lesson on that this week. Jesus said that the shedding of Abel's blood occurred at the foundation of the world, Luke 11:50-51. Well, if Abel, remember who's Abel? Cain's brother? And who's their parents? Adam and Eve. And who's Adam and Eve's parents? God. I guess yes. Adam and Eve were the first created. And then there was Cain and Abel. And of course, Cain killed Abel. And so what Jesus is doing is He's pointing back, and it says that the foundation, not that there was at a certain time in all of the billions of years or a certain time of history, he goes, the foundation means the beginning. When you think about a house that is built must have and start with a foundation. You can't put the roof up first. Where are you going to put it? I guess in the front yard. You can't put up the walls because there's nothing to build upon. There might be a little bit of wind from June to November around here. They call it, what do they call that, a hurricane? It's not going to last without a foundation. Foundation is the start. That's where you begin. So what Jesus is saying, that Abel was at the beginning. And that was about 4,000 years or so before Jesus. According to evolution, the Big Bang Theory and deep time, the Earth formed roughly 4.54 billion years ago. According to evolutionary theory, humans did not arrive on the scene until roughly 2 million years ago. In other words, humans arrived on the scene at the very end of the world as we know it, not its foundation. I think that's fascinating. See, what they're saying is that you have all of these billions of years of evolution, and evolution is the evolving, which, again, you go all the way back to the Big Bang, they can't explain, well, what was before the Big Bang? Where did that material come from? Where did that, you just can't, and it can't last forever because that breaks the second law of thermodynamics, which we'll mention a little bit here. I'm going to throw out a lot of words, and some of these big words I might have had to look up and even actually hit the pronunciation button a few hundred times on my computer just to make sure I said it right. But don't let these big words scare you. We're going to kind of try to define them a little bit, but we're ultimately going to look at this idea if these things, that these evolutionary people out there in the world, if what they're using and what they're doing and what they're saying is correct. According to the Big Bang model, 99.96% of the Earth's existence in time past, past in time before humans arrived. 99.96%. Jesus said it was at the foundation. And what we mean by foundation was at the start. In Genesis 1, chapter 1, you have the days of creation. That's the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes all the way down and through there, and you have the different days. You go all the way down to day 6, and that was man and land animals. And on the 7th day, he rested. In 1 week's time, the earth was, and the heavens were created. Not billions of years. There's no room for gaps, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Look at a couple words that we can go to into the book of Genesis. In Mark chapter 10 and verse 6, Jesus said, God made humans from the beginning of creation, male and females, quoting from Genesis 1:27. Back in Genesis 1:27 is the creation of humans. In Matthew chapter 19, the chapter about divorce, marriage and divorce, and Jesus all the time is getting tempted, and we're not going to go into that subject, but I want to point out Jesus goes back to creation, and he says, and he answered verse 4, and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? That's creation. Jesus goes back to creation and illustrates creation. And I will throw this out, and then I'll quickly run on. But notice once again, he created them male and female. That's it. There's not 100 different genders, and you can't cross over from one gender to the other and back and forth, because God created a set pattern from the beginning. But according to modern science, the universe is roughly 13.8 billion years old, meaning that humans were not around from the beginning of creation. Who's right? Well, I'm going to go with God is right. Well, let's ask a couple questions. Question number 1. Are the days of Genesis 1 literal or figurative? That's a big question. You believe in the Bible, but there are some that believe in God, but yet they believe that God used evolution. They're called theistic evolutionists. There are some even in the church today that are teaching that we live on an old earth, not a young earth, that the earth is millions and billions of years old. There was a guy, I don't know if he's still around anymore, if he's John Clayton. He was up in Indiana, and I remember he had all this stuff that would come out when I was a teenager, and it was about the existence of God. But then one of the things my dad pointed out, if you look and dive into the research, he believes in that there's millions of years. There can't be. Let's look at Genesis 1, because we're going to look at a word to try to help us understand. Some, wishing to harmonize the Bible with the evolutionary time frame, attach a figurative meaning of day to the days of Genesis 1, arguing that the days of Genesis 1 could be millions of years each. Because with God, a day, this is their reasoning, this is not mine. I just want to make sure you understand. Because with God, a day is the same thing as 1,000 years. And they go to 2 Peter 3:8. And with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So God couldn't or could have meant that each day was long. Well, is 2 Peter 3:8 truly justifying that inflation, the days of Genesis 1? Of course not. That's not what Peter is discussing there in 2 Peter 3 and verse 8. In truth, Moses used practically every means at his disposal in the Hebrew language to convey the idea that the creation of the universe consisted of 6 normal days. And it's so fascinating how Moses, and again, this is inspired of God, these words are coming from God to Moses, and he's writing them down, and he does everything that he can to limit these days to 24-hour periods of time. The Hebrew word for day that is used in Genesis 1 is the word yom, Y-O-M. And it almost always means either a full 24-hour day or the 12-hour period of the day that enjoys sunlight. Some will argue, and you'll hear this from people that try to discredit the Bible, but some will argue, however, that in some cases Yom can mean a general, rather specific period of time. Like, for example, in my day, we walked everywhere. Well, as in modern English, the context of a statement must be used to determine how the word that has multiple meanings is being used. One example of this is, we have in the Greek one word for the word wine, oinos. But it has different, in the context, it means different things. It can mean actually in the grape, in the cluster of the grape. It can mean unfermented and it can mean fermented. So you have to look at the context. Of course, that's not what my topic's about. And if I have time and we ask questions, don't ask me about oinos, okay? You can ask him or someone else, That's a whole different topic. Moses helped his audience to understand the use of the word day in referring to the 6 days of creation by, for example, modifying it with numbers. Let's look at Genesis 1, verse 5. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. There's so many words that he's using here that limits. What other words is he using here that limit? There's 2 words. What? Evening and morning. Morning and evening were the first day. You see all of those words, those adjectives, I guess you could say, that describe what kind of day it was, the length of the day. How can you get beyond that? How can you say that, well, Moses, yeah, I know that's what he said, but really there's big gaps. This is exactly what Moses said. This is exactly what he meant. God didn't get it wrong. Because again, we believe that Moses was inspired. And if we believe that Moses was inspired and Moses messed up in his terminology, then God got it wrong and God was the one that created everything. That doesn't make any sense. And of course we can go on to, there's other examples. Verse 8. And God called the firmament heaven, so the evening and the morning were the second day. See all those words that describe day? Limits it. And drop down even further to verse 13. So the evening and the morning were the third day. And you can continue on and on. It seems like it's almost like maybe that God knew in his infinite wisdom that humans were going to mess this up. That humans were going to, in denying him, in denying his creation, throw out so many far-fetched ideas that try to distract and take people away from their eye on God. Well, unfortunately, it's that distraction is working. Because there are more people that believe in evolution or in a gap theory, or even if you can throw in theistic evolution, that is that God started the evolutionary process. maybe more than the creation. Although there are some good things that are happening even in maybe in the religious world themselves. I know Apologetics Press in the church is fantastic. And if you want research on anything apologetic, evolution or creation or anything like that, go to that and just type in different things, and there's just a spiritual wealth of knowledge. Minus some things, I've been to the Creation Museum up in, it's actually in Kentucky, but they say it's Cincinnati. It's right across the river. And it's really good. There's a few little things that are kind of minor that you don't really see unless you really look for it. But they really it's heavy on the idea that it was 6 literal days. And then, of course, there's just down the road from there's the Ark Encounter. That's a fascinating place where they've rebuilt to its size, what they think that the Ark kind of looked like. I mean, we didn't have the iPhone back then. Moses couldn't take any pictures of the Ark, any selfies before he got on, so we don't know exactly what it looked like. We know the diameters, and we've got a lot of other things with that. Justin Rogers, who is a Hebrew teacher, teaches Hebrew language at Freed-Hardeman University and is considered by many as a scholar when it comes to the Hebrew language. He said this, he said, while it is true that the Hebrew term day can be used in a non-literal sense in other contexts, the terms evening and morning are always used in a literal sense. There is, to my knowledge, no place in the Bible in which the terms evening and morning refer to a broad scope of time. They are always literal. And this comes from, again, a Hebrew scholar, knows the Hebrew, can read the Hebrew from Genesis all the way through. It's interesting also, if you think about it, there was another word that Moses could have used. Moses could have used the Hebrew word dor, D-O-R. And I might not even be pronouncing it. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. Which refers to a long period of time, an age or a generation, but he did not. That's what's so fascinating. Again, going back to that, God, I think, knew that people were going to believe this eventually, that he doesn't exist. They weren't going to, that time is billions of years, or the universe or whatever. Moses, he could have had Moses, use the word dor, D-O-R, which does mean age or generation, or it could be longer periods of time. But he didn't. He had him use the Hebrew word for evening, the Hebrew word for morning, the Hebrew word for each of the first, second, third, and a different Hebrew word, yom, to localize it into 24-hour periods of time. Something just a side note, why couldn't God create everything within 6 days? He is God. Why do we even doubt? But there are many people that do. I don't want to miss the break, so make sure it's 38, so because there's probably cookies and stuff back there. Huh? Okay, good. Second question. Do evolutionary dating methods prove an old Earth? You've probably heard of all these different things. We'll just hit on them kind of briefly. Things like carbon dating and radioisotopes and other things like this. Daughter isotopes. If the Earth is actually relatively young, as the Bible implies or demands, How then do we explain the many supposed evidences of an old earth? Because you'll hear scientists come out and say, we can look at this rock and it is billions of years old. I have here something that I bought at a store. I was fascinated with it. This is a trilobite, an actual trilobite fossil. And on the little insert that tells you what it was was supposedly found in Morocco. It says that it is between 521 to 252 million years old. That's what it says on the front. So we might as well get rid of the Bible. I mean, this little card tells us everything, right? No. And that's in that whole store that had all these different fossils and everything. Everything had millions and millions, and kids are going in there, and I was looking around, and these kids are in there, and they're looking at this stuff, and they're reading this, and I feel really bad. I want to just go and say, hey kid, that's not true, but then I'm afraid I'll get beat up by his father because you're not supposed to talk to little children. But this came from creation that God did. And I have found small ones like this myself up in Ohio. And this is actually supposed to be some that I found in Ohio are ones that actually are supposedly come from the ocean. How'd the ocean water get in Ohio? We didn't have a nice beach on the to go to and look out into the Atlantic Ocean. All we had the Lake Erie, and they were man-made beaches, and Lake Erie was nasty. You didn't get out in that water and swim around. How did some of these, and trilobites and other things that were from the sea, get to Ohio? Anybody know? Wow, you guys are you're good. I have numerous different things. I'll pass this around. You can look at this. There's all sorts of fossils that are embedded in these. And this one that I'm passing around has like spores or sponges that you would find at the bottom of an ocean. And we found these. There's an area called Caesar's Creek in Ohio, just outside of Dayton, you can go to. And for free, you can go out and fossil hunt in this big, huge area. And there are millions and billions of fossils that are laying. But some of them you have to really look for, because like that trilobite, they're real small. They don't have these big ones there. And so my daughter and I, we go after those little trilobites. But I have actually put those up because I'm afraid of losing them. They're just real small. But here's another one that has, and these are things that were supposed to be found in the ocean. But when they were putting a spillway for a dam there in Caesar's Creek, when they started digging this out, they found all of this all over the place. And we're supposed to, you can go in and you can take what you want. It has to be the size of the palm of your hand. That one, that broke the rule just a little bit, but that had some neat stuff on it. And of course, my hand was the biggest, so my kids would run up and put it in my hand to make sure it was, because they didn't want to put it in their hand. But during the break, you're welcome to come up and look at all these things. And I wanted to bring, this is another one. This is actually one I found at an auction, a local auction, and that's a fish embedded in that. And we'll talk about, and I'm introducing these to get you kind of excited. I don't want anybody like during the break go, there's a ball game or something on, I can slip out and just go. I want you to get excited about looking at some of these things. So you're welcome to look at these up here. But this type of stuff people will look at and they will date into the millions and millions and millions of years. Well, the first type of thing that they will use is a thing called radiometric dating. And in radiometric dating, it goes back this introduce this by saying, the second law of thermodynamics tells us that the universe is running down or wearing out. We are running out of usable energy. Matter itself is breaking down. Various elements break down into other elements over time, and the breakdown appears to be at constant rates today. Scientists are able to measure the rate at which what they call parent radioactive isotopes decay into what they call daughter isotopes. You have the parent and it will decay into another form. This ability is an amazing technological feat, unsurpassed in known human history. However, a major issue arises based on what evolutionary geologists do with the information that they gather from this process. See, you got one of the things, and I remember seeing they're up at the Creation Museum, they have a film, and it has archaeologists, and they have one guy who says he's an atheist, the other guy who says he believes in creation. And what they say is that the archaeologist that believes that is an atheist goes at everything he sees not with his eyes wide open, but with a preconceived idea. Already it is millions and billions of years old. And any evidence that proves otherwise must have just been a mistake. They must have just messed up. Especially when it comes down to the fact that in some dinosaur fossils that are supposed to be millions of years old, they have found tissue, like blood vessels, blood that is, there's no way it could last millions and millions, 65 million years. Especially in the Carolinas where it was found. Break time? All right, so after the break, we'll talk more about the fossils, but like I said, you're welcome to come up and look at them. Each fossil, I'm selling them tonight for $19.95, but just wait. No, I have 2 kids that just finished college. I need all right, I hope you were able to take a look at some of these fossils up here because, again, as we talked, I have on the side here fossils from Caesars Creek, and that's in Ohio, like I said, on just outside of Dayton. And we talked about how how could they have gotten there? Of course, it was a global flood, which fits into the Bible timeline. The Bible tells us, it gives us that there's creation, and then it talks about the generations that go down to Noah, and that then God destroyed the earth, and the animals that were on the ark and the 8 souls that were on the ark were only ones that lived. In fact, Peter also references and talks about Noah in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 20, when he uses that as an illustration of talking about getting into Christ and how the baptism puts us into Christ. And he says that there was a few, that is 8 souls were saved. And then in verse 21 of 1 Peter chapter 3, it says there's an antitype baptism, which also now saves us. It's not the removal of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that, that was the baptism was that doorway, or is that doorway into Christ, the ark of safety. All right, let's go back to, we were talking about the radiometric dating methods. We talked about that there's a law, a second law of thermodynamics, which says that things are winding down. While we talked about it, says, however, a major issue arises based on what evolutionary geologists do with the information that they gather from this process. Using the known decay rates of the elements, they are studying evolutionary geologists calculate backwards in time to try to determine the age of a specimen. While this procedure might seem reasonable on the surface, there are significant issues with this practice. The older a specimen is said to be, the more inaccurate the dating technique is known to be. The margin of error is greater. You know, they might take something like this, and they might try to date it. And you know what they'll come up with? Oh, it's somewhere between, 300 and 750 million years. I don't know about you. I was not the best at math, but that's a big gap. I mean, that's a lot of zeros, even when you subtract the two. So there's some problems that they have with that. And again, like on this one, this trilobite that I showed you earlier and said, I mean, they say it's somewhere between 521 to 252 million years ago. That's a big gap. A lot of zeros there. One reason scientists are aware of this fact is because different dating techniques are often used to date the same specimen and completely different ages result. Offering differing by millions of years, it is reasonable to conclude that the primary reason for this discrepancy is the effect of unrealistic assumptions. They go at it to assume already that it's got to be over this amount of time. And what we mean by that, again, with this big rock, they would take one method and they would date it with that one method. And then that scientist might pass it off to someone else, and then they would take the same instrument, the same example, the same specimen, and they would date it with something else. And then they would come back and compare. And then again, that's where you got these huge discrepancies of millions and millions of years. There's got to be something wrong with that. Well, there is. What the problem is that they have made improper assumptions. And we're going to look at a couple of those. Assumption number one. It is called that no daughter element existed at the beginning. And I'll mention what that is. One major assumption upon which radiometric dating techniques are based is that while a specimen might currently have various daughter elements, that you have a parent, the parent is the first, and a daughter would be something that results from that other element or that specimen. In other words, the dating technique assumes that the rock was initially completely composed of the parent element. But how could one possibly substantiate an assumption about the initial conditions of a specimen's decay process? What they say is that, initially, at the very beginning, it was one thing, and it had all that makeup, all those elements in that. And then over time, as it decayed, it would change into another element. There's a lot of assumptions there. The assumption is, one of the assumptions is that there was none of those other elements at the beginning. Does that make sense? Hopefully, I'm trying, I've had to really myself dumb this down for me. I'm not saying that I'm dumbing that down for you. That really came out bad. That is not what I meant. I'm saying I kind of understand it. Hopefully you can. Hopefully I'm making sense. And say, as long as you don't say that dumb downing thing again, you'll be fine. Well, that's what we do. We got to keep going back. You got to keep, these long periods of time. And the other thing that we find in the fossil records, there's nothing that connects these different supposed evolutionary changes. There is nothing in the fossil record that shows a change from the intermittent change from a monkey to a human. There's nothing that has been found in between. And with millions and millions of years, if man has been here for 4.8 million years, and that he evolved from something that was before him millions of years, then we should have, just an overabundance, a wealth of information to connect the fossil record. I mean, you could go to this place, Caesar's Creek, and find millions and millions and millions of fossils laying all over the place. I mean, there's slabs that are, as big as this area right here. And they're full of different fossils. And the only reason you can take that which is supposed to fit into the palm of your hand is because they say they want these fossils left for future generations, and as erosion happens, these break apart. But all those fossils and everything that's out there, they can't find, there are no connections. Well, that points to the fact that there was never evolution. And that it has always been, in the beginning, God created. And that this in the beginning happened recently compared to what their numbers are. We're a young earth compared to their numbers. I mean, if you got numbers of 13.8 billion for the whole universe, and we're saying that that the Bible teaches, and we can see that it was created in 6 days, about 6,000 to 7,500 years ago, that's relatively new. Is it not possible and even likely that a specimen or that various rocks were even created by God from the outset? That is it not possible that various rocks were even created by God from the outset, composed of more than one daughter element, due to the usefulness of having those elements already in existence, rather than awaiting for their emergence through a decay process? See, these elements are needed. Maybe were needed at the beginning. Those elements were already there. Who says that they weren't? Well, the evolutionists say that they weren't, but they can't prove that they weren't. All they can see is what you see now. But the assumption is that these didn't exist then. But who is to say, is it not possible that God already created everything? Number one, He created everything in an adult earth. You know, it is not, I don't have a problem with the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You believe in God, the chicken came first, because God created it. And I truly believe when He created the animals, He created, just like He created man, an adult man. And there's other things we can say about that. How could one possibly conclusively assert that any specimen was initially composed only of one element and then over time changed? Assumption number 2. You said I had till 9:30, right? What was the time?
Maybe about 8:25 or so.
Okay. All right. The second assumption is elements have not been affected by outside forces. So everything that they have and that they see has been preserved. That's their assumption. But we know that that can't be true. A second assumption upon which this radiometric dating techniques are based is that the amounts of parent or daughter isotopes in a specimen have not been altered during the decay process by anything except radioactivity or radioactive decay. So, according to this assumption, the specimen being examined is in a closed system. In other words, the amount of the elements present in a sample have not ever been affected by outside elements. How can you prove that? How can you prove that something has never been exposed to anything else? One, very, in the realm of geology, well-known individual, his name is Mark Harrison. He is professor of geology in the Department of Earth and Space Sciences at the University of California, Los Angeles. I bet he has a lot of letters after his name. A lot of letters I don't have. But he said this: departures from this assumption, in fact, are quite common. The assumption that there's differences, particularly in the areas of complex geological history. There's a thing called leaching. This happens when a liquid, like water, washes materials away from something. Leaching is known to wash away parent or daughter elements from rocks and add them to another element. And see, what these scientists are saying, that this element over here had all these properties. You can't prove that because water could have rushed over them and transported that particular element or properties over to another specimen, another rock, another place. And we know that there's been a lot of water in the past, especially somewhere around Genesis 6. Even the most accurate techniques are flawed. What does this say about the less accurate techniques? To blindly claim a closed system for a specimen that is believed to be very old is reckless, unreasonable. Number one, when there is clear evidence that a closed system cannot be guaranteed. And second, when in fact there is compelling evidence that ancient Earth was rocked by a global catastrophe. Anybody ever been to the Grand Canyon? I love the Grand Canyon. I've been there once. Seen pictures, they don't do justice. Go to the Grand Canyon. Well, our family went to the Grand Canyon one year, and we're standing out there and we're looking off, the edge. And, there's fencing around. I've kept my kids are older, so they were all right. But I heard these two ladies talking to this kind of a guide. And they were asking, well, what created this? How did this happen? Is there, do they know? Do scientists know? And he said, well, over millions and millions of years, a river carved through, the Colorado River, that carved through the Grand Canyon and is what you see today. And I was just listening. And I was fascinated because the lady says, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I was like, okay, my ears are perked up. You mean a river did all of this? And you say millions and millions of years? And I said, I just couldn't help myself. Being a preacher, my daughter's taking off running when I interjected. I said, I have another idea to how this Grand Canyon was created. And they both turned and the guide looked at me and I said, a global catastrophe called the flood. And the lady said, you know what? That does make more sense. I was shocked. I don't know if maybe she was some religious background and she was just trying to be nice to the guy but not really arguing with him. But she said that, and I said, if you look at, if you have a dirt road and the water comes in and then it rushes back out, it makes trenches in that dirt road. If you had a global flood that came through and then pulled itself back, couldn't it make those trenches? It sure could. The mountains, people say, well, all these things, and it had to be millions and billions of years old, but again, a global flood with the power that the water has could actually push those mountains up, coming from either side, and push mountains up into the skies. Water is powerful. Not only is it powerful physically, I like that show, Deadliest Catch. Don't judge me. But I do like to sit and watch that. And there's one day of the week that it's on 6 or 7 times on one channel. And so I kind of binge through that. But I remember watching one episode and the water, this big old huge wave, they called it a rogue wave, 30 feet or more, or I don't remember what the amount was, but it came up and it slammed into the front of one of the boats, the Northwestern boat. And after that water went away, they looked and it had bent the front of that boat and put a hole in one section and actually took off some of the paint on that steel. That's not a plastic boat, that's not a little fiberglass boat. That's metal, that's strong metal. And that wave, that water did that. We've got to believe what the Bible teaches. And if we just open up our eyes and our hearts to it, we'll definitely find the truth. There is so many other things. I can't go through everything that's in this and all the different things, but are there scientific evidences of a young Earth? And there are some, and I'll hit these kind of hit and go. But one, which I thought was quite interesting, Apologetics Press put down that human population statistics, and I never really thought about this. I never really considered this, and I didn't understand. I saw this, and it says, evolutionists argue that humans have been on the earth for roughly 2 to 3 million years. Using statistics, one can arrive at an estimate for how many people would be predicted to be on the earth at different points in history. For example, accounting for factors such as war, disease, and famine, and assuming humans have been on the planet for only 1 million rather than 2 to 3 or beyond, we find that there should be 10 to the 2,000 power. That's 2,000 zeros. That's the number of people that should be on the planet today. There are, however, not even 10 to the 10th power of people on the earth. In fact, they go on and they say if 3 feet tall humans with narrow shoulders, I'm out, way out, were squeezed into the universe like sardines, only 10 to the 82nd power could fit into the entire universe. You know, it might be tempting to argue that the earth could only sustain roughly 50 billion people, resource-wise, and therefore all humans above that number would die off. If that were the case, however, there should be evidence that the Earth's resource capacity has been met many times in the past in the form of billions upon billions of fossils. Again, it goes back to the fossil. And the record does not show where there's billions of human fossils or any type of fossils that show that the Earth's resources are gone. We're gone at any certain period of time. And so that you know, just you can look at so many other ideas, but that, for one, that really kind of stood out to me. An evolutionary scientist admitted this several years ago. He said, the fossils that decorate our family tree are so scarce that there are still more scientists than there are specimens. He said the remarkable fact is that all the physical evidence we have for human evolution can still be placed with room to spare inside a single coffin. One, I don't know where it came from, but there was one that actually sat down and predicted, looking at the roughly 4,350 years since the flood. If the planet then began to repopulate by 6 people, namely the sons of Noah and their wives, that's a good word, statistics show that there should be roughly 6.7 to 8.1 billion people on the planet today. The U.S. Census Bureau documents that the world's population is about 7.9 billion. Wow. And this is someone that just took just the statistics, just the information, and did a population count all the way through and put in, the ideas of war and disease and different things, and we're right where we should be. God created the whole earth in just 6 literal days, some roughly 6,000 years ago. The Bible claims it. The fossils claim it. The final thing I mentioned just briefly before we went to our break about the soft tissue and blood vessels in a dinosaur fossil. One of the last uncontested dinosaur fossils found in a certain period of time in the geologic column. They have these, the different levels in the earth. And each level that geologists say it's this million years ago, and then this is this many years ago, and it gets closer and closer. Well, in that particular level, the dinosaur era, which is supposed to be, according to these scientists, roughly 252 million years ago, they say there could be, and the scientists admit this, it would be impossible to find anything that had flesh on it. It would all be just like this is. This is a fish. There's no, it has what looks like scales, but that's fossilized. It's not flesh. But they actually found a dinosaur in the Carolinas that had some flesh and some blood tissue on it. And obviously no flesh could conceivably survive 100,000 years without decay, much less 1 million years, and much less 65 million years, and go on and go on. As of 2005, however, many fossils, including those of dinosaurs, have been cracked open and studied only to find blood vessels with red blood cells intact, original proteins, and soft, stretchy, flexible tissue that can only go back so far. It can't go 100,000 years. It can't go millions of years. The list has grown of different types of dinosaurs. You ever heard of the T-Rex? Oh, I can get these little kids up here, and I can probably name a lot of these names that I have trouble pronouncing, and they'd be able to, yeah, I've seen that. I've seen the picture of that. I know exactly what that is. They found T-Rex with tissue. That's supposed to have died off 65 million years ago. While certain sterile conditions could conceivably preserve organic remains for hundreds or even maybe 1,000 or thousands of years, the fossils being studied were not discovered in sterile laboratorial environments, but rather harsh environments like the Midwestern U.S. with large temperature differentials, erratic weather, and climate conditions that accelerate decay. No reasonable explanation has been offered, and yet the evidence has continued, not decontinued, not stopped. It has continued to mount. The most plausible explanation is that the geologic strata that host the dinosaurs do not date to 66 plus million years ago, but rather to a few thousand years ago, and they died not because of an asteroid hitting or a meteorite hitting the earth. We were talking about that back there just a little bit ago. It's interesting that they say that this meteor, that there was this global catastrophe that happened, but they put it 66 million years ago that this meteorite hit the earth, and it covered the earth with all this, and all the animals died and the plants died. A global catastrophe. I agree with them on one thing. It was global. That's all I'll agree with them on that. But it was global. It was with water. And it was only about 4,300 years ago. And so all of this is, again, it is just fascinating. Is evolution true, regardless of the legitimacy of the Big Bang or Darwinian evolution specifically? Neither can be true if the earth is young. Is there any evidence that the earth is old? Or is belief in an old earth a blind faith? The Bible, which does not require a blind faith, since it proves itself to be from God, does not allow a millions to billion years of earth. The scientific dating methods, all of these other things have been disproven, have been shown with flaws, numerous flaws. Does that mean I'm done? Oh, I got 5 minutes? All right. I'll let I've done all the talking. I know that it's only 5 minutes, but anyone want to make a brief comment?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Excellent material. Appreciate it. You made the point about water and how powerful it is. And a lot of people overlook the fact that in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 11, And that's a small thing that people miss sometimes.
Absolutely. Yes.
You mentioned Grand Canyon
Yes, sir.
created, and the answer was that it was created by the Colorado River. The next question should be, if the Colorado River washed away all the rock that was part of the Grand Canyon, where did the rock go? It would go down the Mississippi River, or Colorado River into the Mississippi, and end up in the mouth of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
It's not there. The delta that is there is nowhere near how much soil and ground it would take to fill the Grand Canyon. So the idea that the Colorado River washed it away, what did it do with the residue that it washed away?
It's an excellent point. Absolutely. I mean, all these things that we can throw, all these questions, and you will find that, again, evolutionists cannot and will not answer. I have a book that is entitled Forbidden Archaeology. And what it is it's an evolutionist that is trying to take all these archaeological finds and try to prove them even though they've been disproven. But the kids are coming in. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for your attention. Thanks for not leaving in between in the break. So.